After my sister left her husband, she moved into my life. Then she tried to control my relationships and future as if it were her own ABD. It was a Tuesday night when my life took a sharp turn. I was sitting on my couch, halfway through a takeout pizza and watching a rerun of some crime procedural, when I heard a knock at the door. My first thought was that it had to be Ryan, my best friend, swinging by unannounced to borrow something. But when I opened the door, it wasn't Ryan. It was Morgan. She stood there, clutching a suitcase in one hand and a duffel bag slung over her shoulder. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her makeup was perfect, classic Morgan, always polished even when the world was crumbling around her. She looked up at me with a small, tight smile and said, "Hey, Caleb, can I stay here for a bit?" I froze. My sister hadn't stepped foot in my apartment since I moved here 3 years ago. She'd always been the type to orbit in her own world, constantly on the go with Jared, her now ex-husband, traveling for work or hosting lavish dinner parties in their too-big house. She wasn't the drop-by-unannounced type, let alone the move-in without notice type. Still, what was I supposed to say? No. Find a hotel? She was my sister. Family. So, I stepped aside and let her in. Morgan's bit quickly turned into an unpacking session. She commandeered the guest bedroom without asking and immediately started reorganizing it, shoving my boxes into my closet, replacing the neutral bedding with her own expensive sheets, and stacking her skincare products in my bathroom. She didn't even ask if I minded. She just acted like she belonged there. The first couple of days, I let it slide. She'd just been through a divorce, after all. Jared had apparently blindsided her, announcing one morning that he wasn't happy and leaving by lunchtime. She told me the story over Chinese takeout on her second night in my apartment, painting Jared as an irredeemable villain. I was sympathetic at first. Who wouldn't be? But then she started taking over my life. It began with little things. She'd make comments about my routines, like how I worked too many hours or didn't cook enough for myself. "You're going to burn out if you keep eating garbage," she'd say while throwing away my frozen dinners and replacing them with her organic kale salads. She'd rearrange my fridge, moving my beer to the bottom shelf and filling the rest with her fancy juices and prepped meals. Then it escalated. Morgan didn't like that I spent so much time with Ryan, my best friend. "He's immature," she'd said one night while scrolling through her phone on my couch. "You need friends who challenge you to grow, not ones who keep you stuck in the past." Ryan had been my friend since college, and while he wasn't perfect, sure, he was a bit of a man-child at times. He'd been there for me through thick and thin. But Morgan didn't see it that way. "I'm just trying to help," she'd say when I pushed back. "You've always been too nice, Caleb. You let people take advantage of you." The irony wasn't lost on me. What really started to bother me, though, was how she treated my apartment like it was hers. She'd invite her friends over without asking, people I didn't know, filling my living room with laughter and wine glasses while I hid in my bedroom. She even had the audacity to give my spare key to Sophie, one of her friends, without telling me. "I thought you wouldn't mind," Morgan said when I confronted her about it. "Sophie just needed a place to crash for the night. Then why didn't she crash at your place?" I shot back, my frustration finally bubbling to the surface. Morgan just gave me this sad, wounded look, like I'd kicked her puppy. "I don't have a place, Caleb. That's why I'm here." That shut me up for a while. But the more she settled in, the harder it became to ignore how much space she was taking up, not just in my apartment but in my life. She started texting me at work to remind me about errands I needed to run, critiquing my outfits before I left the house, and making subtle jabs about my lack of ambition. "You could do so much more with your life," she said one evening, flipping through a magazine on my couch. "Why don't you go back to school? Or apply for that management position at work? You're wasting your potential, Caleb." I bit my tongue, but inside, I was fuming. My job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and I was happy. Or at least I had been before Morgan moved in. Now, every aspect of my life felt under scrutiny. The breaking point came when she tried to meddle in my love life. I'd been casually seeing Harper, a woman I'd met at a mutual friend's party. Things were still in the early stages, but I liked her a lot. She was smart, funny, and down-to-earth in a way that was refreshing after years of bad dates. But Morgan didn't approve. "She's just like Jared," Morgan said one night after meeting Harper for the first time. charming on the surface, but you can tell she's trouble. What the hell does that even mean? I asked, my patience wearing thin. Just trust me, she said, her tone dripping with condescension. I know how to spot red flags. I didn't respond, but something about the way Morgan said it sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just that she was being judgmental. It was that she seemed so convinced she knew what was best for me. Like I was a project she could fix. By the end of the first month, I was starting to feel suffocated. Morgan wasn't just living in my apartment. She was living in my head, planting seeds of doubt about my choices, my friends, and my future. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that she'd eventually find her own place and leave me alone. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. Because Morgan didn't just want a roof over her head. She wanted control. And she was just getting started. The thing about Morgan is that she never does anything halfway. When she commits to something, she goes all in. Whether it's redecorating a room or, apparently, rebuilding my life in her image. After the first month, her presence in my apartment felt less like a temporary arrangement and more like a hostile takeover. Her criticisms became less subtle. She would walk into the living room, glance at my gaming setup, and sigh dramatically. You're 30, Caleb. Don't you think it's time to outgrow this stuff? What kind of woman wants to date a guy who spends his nights playing video games? I let it slide the first few times. But when she unplugged my console during a boss fight, claiming it was for my own good, I lost it. Morgan, this is my apartment. My life, I snapped. You don't get to waltz in here and start making the rules. She didn't even flinch. I'm just trying to help. You'll thank me later. That phrase, you'll thank me later, became her go-to justification for every boundary she trampled. When she rearranged my kitchen cabinets, threw out my favorite hoodie because it had too many holes, and even started waking me up early on weekends to make the most of the day, it was always for my supposed benefit. Things came to a head when she started targeting Harper. I hadn't told Harper much about Morgan's living situation, mostly because I didn't want to scare her off. But after a couple of weeks of dodging her invitations to hang out at my place, Harper started asking questions. Is something going on? She asked one night over dinner. You're always at my apartment, never yours. I hesitated. Harper was easygoing and empathetic, but I wasn't sure how to explain the tornado that was Morgan. Finally, I just blurted it out. My sister's staying with me, I said. She's going through some stuff. Harper nodded, her expression softening. That makes sense. I can't imagine what she must be feeling after her divorce. It's nice of you to let her stay. Her understanding made me feel even guiltier for keeping her in the dark, but I didn't have the heart to tell her how bad it really was. Morgan met Harper for the first time at a coffee shop. It was supposed to be casual, a quick introduction before Harper and I want to see a movie, but Morgan turned it into an interrogation. So, Harper, what do you do for a living? Morgan asked, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. I'm a graphic designer, Harper said, unfazed. Interesting. Freelance, or do you work for a company? A company. Morgan nodded like she was taking mental notes. And what's your 5-year plan? Harper blinked, caught off guard. I don't know. Keep growing in my career, I guess. Morgan's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. That's a little vague, don't you think? Caleb needs someone with a clear vision for the future. I nearly choked on my coffee. Morgan. What? She said, feigning innocence. I'm just looking out for you. Harper was polite about it, but I could tell she was irritated. On the way to the theater, she finally said, Your sister is intense. She's just protective, I said, though even I didn't believe it anymore. Harper let it go, but Morgan didn't. The next morning, she cornered me in the kitchen while I was making coffee. Harper's not right for you, she said bluntly. I stared at her, dumbfounded. Excuse me? She's directionless, Morgan said, crossing her arms. You deserve someone who's ambitious, someone who can match your energy. My energy? I repeated, incredulous. Since when are you the expert on my love life? I'm your sister, Caleb. I know you better than anyone. I laughed bitterly. No, you know who I was when we were kids. You have no idea who I am now. Morgan didn't take the hint. Instead, she doubled down. She started finding little ways to sabotage my relationship with Harper. One night, she accidentally locked the door while I was out, forcing me to cancel my plans because I couldn't get back into the apartment. Another time, she called Harper directly, pretending to be concerned about my emotional state and hinting that I wasn't ready for a serious relationship. Harper confronted me about it after that call. "Is there something you're not telling me?" she asked, her voice tight with frustration. "Your sister said you've been struggling. If that's true, I want to help, but I need to know what's going on." I was furious. "No, Harper. That's just Morgan trying to stir up drama. She doesn't know what she's talking about." Harper nodded slowly, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. Morgan's meddling was starting to wear on her, and on me. Things reached a boiling point when Morgan made a surprise visit to my office. I was in the middle of a meeting when my coworker Sophie tapped on the conference room door. "Hey, Caleb, your sister's here. She says it's urgent." I excused myself, already bracing for the worst. Sure enough, Morgan was standing in the lobby, looking completely out of place in her tailored blazer and high heels. "What are you doing here?" I hissed. "I wanted to check in on you," she said, as if that was a perfectly normal thing to do. "You've been so stressed lately. I thought maybe we could grab lunch and talk." "I'm working," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "You can't just show up like this." Morgan looked genuinely hurt, but I didn't have the energy to care. I escorted her out of the building, ignoring the curious stares from my coworkers. When I got back to my desk, I had a text from her. "I'm only trying to help. Why can't you see that?" That night, Harper and I had a serious conversation. "I care about you, Caleb," she said, her voice soft but firm, "but I can't keep dealing with your sister. She's overstepping and it's affecting us." "I know," I said, feeling a knot of guilt in my stomach. "I'm trying to handle it." "You need to set boundaries," Harper said. "For your sake and for ours." She was right, of course. But every time I tried to talk to Morgan, she'd deflect or get defensive. She'd remind me of how much she'd sacrificed for me growing up, how she was only trying to protect me, how I'd regret pushing her away. "You're my family," she said one night, tears in her eyes. "Why are you treating me like the enemy?" I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that I couldn't keep living like this. Morgan wasn't just meddling in my life. She was trying to take it over, and I had no idea how to stop her. By the time Morgan had been living with me for 3 months, my life didn't feel like my own anymore. It wasn't just the constant meddling or the way she turned every conversation into a lecture. It was the fact that, somehow, she'd made herself indispensable. If I told her to leave, I wasn't sure I'd know how to put the pieces back together. The truth was, Morgan wasn't just controlling, she was good at it. One Saturday, Harper and I decided to have a quiet evening at my place, even though I knew it was risky. Morgan had a habit of inserting herself into my plans, but I was determined to carve out some space for Harper and me. We ordered takeout and settled on the couch, trying to make the best of it. Morgan, of course, had other ideas. She came into the living room mid-movie, wearing one of her tailored outfits as if she'd just come back from an important meeting, even though she hadn't worked since moving in. "Oh, I didn't realize you had company," she said, though the way her eyes narrowed told me she absolutely did. "We're just watching a movie," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. Morgan sat down in the armchair, completely uninvited. "What are you watching?" "Something for us," Harper said pointedly, clearly tired of Morgan's antics. Morgan ignored the jab. "Oh, Caleb, I meant to tell you. I saw your boss at the grocery store the other day. I mentioned how hard you've been working lately." He seemed really concerned. I blinked at her, stunned. "You what?" "I thought he should know," Morgan said innocently. "You've been so stressed, and I didn't want it to affect your job performance." Harper turned to me, her mouth slightly open in disbelief. "She talked to your boss?" I could feel the heat rising in my face. "Morgan, you had no right to do that. My work is none of your business." Morgan's face fell, but there was a glint of defiance in her eyes. "I was just trying to help. Why are you getting so defensive?" "Because you crossed a line," I snapped, my voice louder than I intended. Harper put a hand on my arm, trying to calm me down, but I was too angry to stop. "You can't just interfere in my life like that. This isn't your house, Morgan. You're a guest here." Morgan's lips trembled, and for a moment, I thought she was going to cry. But instead, she stood up, her expression icy. You know what, Caleb? I didn't expect you to be so ungrateful. I've done nothing but look out for you, and this is the thanks I get. Before I could respond, she stormed out of the room. Harper and I sat in stunned silence, the tension so thick it was hard to breathe. She's manipulating you, Harper said quietly, breaking the silence. You know that, right? I nodded, but deep down, I wasn't sure what to do about it. Morgan had always been this way, controlling, self-assured, and deeply convinced that she knew best. But this time, it felt different. It felt dangerous. The next day, I decided to confront Morgan about her behavior. She was in the kitchen, making one of her elaborate breakfasts. I'd barely slept, replaying the argument in my head over and over. We need to talk, I said, leaning against the counter. Morgan didn't look up from the frying pan. About what? About last night. About everything. You're crossing boundaries, and it's not okay, she sighed, flipping a pancake with practiced ease. You're overreacting, Caleb. I've only ever done what's best for you. That's the problem, I said, my voice rising. You're treating me like a child who can't make his own decisions. I'm not Jared, Morgan. You don't get to project your issues onto me. At the mention of Jared, her face hardened. She set the spatula down and turned to face me. You have no idea what you're talking about. Then tell me, I challenged. What really happened with Jared? Her eyes flickered, and for the first time, I saw something I hadn't before, fear. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Finally, she shook her head. You wouldn't understand. Try me, I said. She hesitated, then turned back to the stove. Jared left because he couldn't handle me. He thought I was too controlling, too demanding. He said I made him feel trapped. I crossed my arms. And he was wrong? Morgan's hands clenched into fists. Of course he was wrong. I was trying to save our marriage. I was trying to help him be a better man. Her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to believe her, to trust that she was just a victim of bad luck and worse relationships. But another part of me, the part that had been living with her for months, knew better. That evening, Harper came over again, despite her reservations. She was determined to stand by me, even if it meant dealing with Morgan's antics. But this time, she wasn't going to stay silent. Halfway through dinner, Harper finally addressed the elephant in the room. Morgan, can I ask you something? She said, her tone calm but firm. Morgan looked up from her plate, her expression guarded. What is it? Why are you so invested in Caleb's life? You're his sister, not his parent. Morgan's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? You heard me, Harper said, refusing to back down. It's one thing to care about your brother. It's another to try to control everything he does. Morgan's face turned red, and for a moment, I thought she was going to explode. But instead, she smiled. A cold, calculated smile that sent a chill down my spine. I'm just doing what's necessary, she said. Caleb's too nice for his own good. He lets people walk all over him. Or maybe he just doesn't need you to micromanage his life, Harper shot back. That's enough, I said, my voice shaking. Both of you. But the damage was done. The tension between Morgan and Harper was now a full-blown war, and I was stuck in the middle. That night, I couldn't sleep. Morgan's words kept echoing in my head, blending with everything Harper had said. I felt like I was being pulled in two different directions, and I didn't know which way to go. Then, as I was lying in bed, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Ryan. Hey man, just heard something weird. Morgan's been talking to Sophie about you. Might want to check it out. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. What was Morgan up to now? The next day, I cornered Sophie at work. She looked uncomfortable when I brought it up, but after some prodding, she finally admitted the truth. She called me, Sophie said. She said you were going through a rough time and needed support. She even suggested I talk to your boss about giving you some time off. I felt a wave of anger and disbelief. Morgan had gone too far this time. She wasn't just meddling. She was actively sabotaging me. That night, I confronted her. What the hell is wrong with you? I demanded. Morgan didn't even try to deny it. I was protecting you, she said calmly. You're too stressed, Caleb. I was just trying to help. No, I said, my voice trembling. You weren't helping. You were controlling me. And it stops now. Morgan stared at me, her expression unreadable. For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes, like she was starting to realize just how much damage she'd done. But the question was, could she stop? Or had she gone too far to turn back? Morgan's meddling didn't stop after our confrontation. If anything, it escalated. She'd always been a master of passive aggression, and now she wielded it like a scalpel, slicing into every aspect of my life with calculated precision. The morning after our fight, I woke up to find her in the kitchen, sipping coffee like nothing had happened. She gave me a tight smile and said, I've been thinking. You're right. I've been a little overbearing. I didn't trust her tone. Glad you see that, I said cautiously. I just want you to know, she continued, that I've only ever had your best interests at heart. But if you want me to back off, I'll back off. It sounded too easy. And as the days passed, I realized why. Morgan wasn't giving up control. She was just changing her tactics. It started with subtle things. She stopped criticizing my routines or Harper outright, but I'd catch her sighing dramatically when she thought I wasn't looking or muttering under her breath about my lack of ambition. She didn't tell me what to do anymore. Instead, she'd ask loaded questions designed to plant doubt in my mind. Are you sure Harper's the right person for you? She'd say casually while folding laundry. She just seems different from the kind of woman I pictured you with. Or, have you thought about applying for a new job? I heard Ryan mentioning that the company down the street is hiring. I bet they'd pay better. At first, I ignored her, chalking it up to Morgan being Morgan. But then she did something I couldn't brush off. One afternoon, I got a call from my boss, Mr. Daniels. He wasn't the type to micromanage, so hearing from him outside of work hours was unusual. Caleb, he said, his tone measured. I wanted to check in. Is everything okay? I frowned, confused. Yeah, why? Well, your sister called the office. She mentioned you've been under a lot of stress lately and suggested we reduce your workload. She even implied you might need some time off. I was mortified. I'm so sorry, I stammered. She had no right to do that. I'm fine, really. Mr. Daniels chuckled awkwardly. I figured as much. Just wanted to let you know in case there's anything you want to talk about. After I hung up, I sat in stunned silence. This wasn't just meddling. Morgan was actively sabotaging my career under the guise of helping. I knew I had to confront her, but I also knew it wouldn't be easy. That evening, I found Morgan in the living room, scrolling through her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. Why the hell did you call my boss? I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. Morgan looked up, feigning surprise. I was worried about you. You had no right, I snapped. Do you realize how unprofessional that makes me look? You're not helping me. You're ruining my life. Her expression hardened. I'm ruining your life? Really? Because from where I'm standing, I'm the only one trying to keep it from falling apart. I laughed bitterly. By meddling in my work? By sabotaging my relationship? How is any of that helpful? Morgan's face twisted, and for the first time, I saw a flash of vulnerability beneath her anger. You don't get it, do you? I'm trying to protect you because no one else will. Protect me from what? I shouted. From being happy? From making my own decisions? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she sank into the couch, her shoulders slumping. From ending up like me, she said quietly. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Morgan had always been strong, confident, and in control, at least on the surface. Hearing her admit otherwise felt like seeing a crack in an unbreakable facade. What do you mean? I asked, my voice softer now. Morgan stared at the floor. I gave everything to Jared, she said. I molded my life around him, did everything I could to make him happy, and in the end, it wasn't enough. He left me anyway. Her voice wavered, and for the first time in years, I saw tears in her eyes. Do you know how that feels? To build your whole life around someone, and then watch them walk away like you're nothing? I didn't respond. I didn't have to. Her pain was written all over her face. That's why I've been hard on you, she continued. I see you making the same mistakes I did. Trusting people too easily, giving too much of yourself. I can't let you go through what I went through. Her words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. And for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered everything she'd done. The manipulation, the sabotage, the way she'd twisted my life into something unrecognizable. And my sympathy turned to anger. I get that you've been through a lot, I said, my voice steady. But that doesn't give you the right to control my life. You're not protecting me, Morgan. You're suffocating me. She flinched like I'd slapped her. I'm just trying to help, she whispered. Well, stop, I said firmly. Because if you don't, I don't know if I can keep you in my life. Morgan didn't speak to me for the rest of the night. The tension in the apartment was unbearable, and for the first time, I seriously considered asking her to leave. But every time I thought about it, I hesitated. She was my sister, and no matter how much she drove me crazy, part of me felt responsible for her. The next day, Harper called me during her lunch break. She'd sensed something was off the last time we talked, and she wanted to check in. How are things with Morgan? She asked. Complicated, I admitted. She's been through a lot, and I think she means well, but she's toxic, Harper finished for me. I didn't argue. She wasn't wrong. Caleb, you have to set boundaries, Harper said gently. She's not going to change unless you make her. And even then, it might not be enough. Her words stuck with me for the rest of the day. I knew she was right, but setting boundaries with Morgan felt like trying to build a dam in the middle of a hurricane. No matter what I did, it wouldn't hold. That evening, Morgan dropped another bombshell. I've decided to stay, she announced over dinner. I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. What do you mean, stay? Here, she said, gesturing around the apartment. I think it's best for both of us if I make this arrangement permanent. I stared at her, stunned. Morgan, you can't just decide that. Why not? She said, her tone matter-of-fact. You're not using the second bedroom anyway, and I'm helping you stay on track. No, I said firmly. This isn't your decision to make. You're my guest, Morgan. You don't get to move in permanently. Her eyes narrowed. You're making a mistake. Maybe, I said, standing up, but it's my mistake to make. Morgan's expression was a mix of hurt and anger, but I didn't care anymore. I was done letting her control me, and for the first time, I started to see a way out of the mess she created. Morgan's declaration that she planned to stay permanently set something off in me. For months, I'd let her chip away at my independence, telling myself it was temporary, that she just needed time to get back on her feet. But now, it was clear. Morgan wasn't looking for a place to recover. She was looking for a new foundation to rebuild her life. And she was using mine without permission. It was time for things to change. The next morning, I started making calls. First, I reached out to Ryan. I hadn't told him much about Morgan's antics, partly because I didn't want to seem like I couldn't handle my own sister, and partly because I knew he'd tell me exactly what I didn't want to hear, that I should have kicked her out months ago. When I told him the situation, he didn't mince words. Dude, she's toxic, Ryan said bluntly. I get that she's your sister, but you've got to draw a line. You can't let her keep running your life. I know, I said, pacing my apartment, but how do I even start? She's so relentless. Every time I try to push back, she makes me feel like I'm the bad guy. Because that's what manipulators do, Ryan said. She's guilt-tripping you so she can keep control. You've got to stop letting her. His words stung, but they were true. I'd let Morgan guilt me into silence for far too long. That evening, I decided to have another conversation with Morgan, this time, without backing down. I found her in the living room, flipping through a magazine as if she didn't have a care in the world. We need to talk, I said, standing in the doorway. She didn't look up. About what? About you moving out. Her head snapped up, and her eyes narrowed. Excuse me? You've overstayed your welcome, Morgan, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I've been patient, but this isn't working. You need to find your own place. Morgan's face hardened, and for a moment, I thought she was going to yell. But instead, she laughed. A cold, bitter laugh that sent a chill down my spine. Do you even hear yourself? She said, standing up. After everything I've done for you, you're just going to kick me out? You haven't done anything for me, I shot back. You've taken over my life and made it miserable. I'm done, Morgan. I want my apartment back, and I want my life back. Her expression shifted, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something. Fear, maybe, or desperation. But she quickly masked it with anger. Fine, she said, her voice trembling. If that's how you feel, I'll go. But don't come crying to me when your life falls apart. She stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. I felt a pang of guilt, but I pushed it aside. I couldn't let her manipulate me anymore. The next few days were tense. Morgan barely spoke to me, and when she did, it was only to make cutting remarks about how ungrateful I was. I started looking up apartments for her, hoping to speed up the process, but she shot down every suggestion I made. They're too expensive, she said dismissively, and too far from work. You don't even have a job, Morgan, I said, exasperated. She glared at me. Wow, Caleb, way to kick me while I'm down. I wanted to scream, but I forced myself to stay calm. I'm trying to help you, Morgan, but you can't stay here anymore. You need to figure something out. Meanwhile, things with Harper were hanging by a thread. She'd been incredibly patient, but I could tell she was reaching her limit. Caleb, I love you, she said one night over the phone, but I can't keep doing this. Your sister is toxic, and she's dragging you down. If you don't set boundaries with her, it's going to ruin us. I'm working on it, I said, though the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. Well, work faster, Harper said, her voice cracking, because I don't know how much longer I can wait. Her words lit a fire under me. I couldn't let Morgan ruin my relationship with Harper. I had to take control. The final showdown came a week later. Morgan had spent the day sulking in her room, but that evening, she came into the living room with an announcement. I've decided to stay, she said, crossing her arms. You can't force me out, Caleb. This is as much my home as it is yours. No, it's not, I said, standing up to face her. This is my apartment, Morgan. I've been letting you stay here as a favor, but that favor is over. You need to leave. Her face turned red with anger. You're really going to throw me out? Your own sister? After everything I've been through? Yes, I said firmly. Because this isn't about you anymore. It's about me. I can't keep living like this, Morgan. You've taken over my life, and I won't let you do it anymore. For a moment, she just stared at me, her expression a mix of shock and fury. Then she burst into tears. You don't understand, she sobbed. I have nowhere else to go. I've lost everything, Caleb, Jared, my home, my friends. I thought you'd at least be on my side. I am on your side, I said, my voice softening. But being on your side doesn't mean letting you take over my life. You need help, Morgan, real help, and I can't give that to you. She didn't respond. She just stood there, crying, until finally, she nodded. Fine, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll leave. The next week was a whirlwind of emotions. Morgan packed her things and moved into a temporary apartment I'd helped her find. She was cold and distant during the process, but I didn't push her. I knew she needed space. Harper, to her credit, was supportive through it all. Once Morgan was gone, she helped me reclaim my apartment, rearranging furniture, throwing out the kale salads Morgan had insisted on buying, and making the space feel like mine again. It's finally over, I said one night as we sat on the couch, sharing a bottle of wine. Harper smiled and squeezed my hand. You did the right thing, Caleb. She'll figure things out. And so will you. I nodded, though part of me still felt a pang of guilt. Morgan was my sister, and I hated the thought of her struggling. But I knew I'd made the right choice, for both of us. A few weeks later, I got a text from Morgan. I'm sorry for everything. I'm starting therapy. I hope you'll forgive me someday. I stared at the message for a long time, unsure how to respond. In the end, I just typed back, I forgive you. I hope you find peace. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. My life was my own, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it away from me, not even family.